It started as a joke during our final summer in Blackwood. Mark had found an old, leather-bound ledger tucked beneath a floorboard in his grandfather's attic. The pages were yellowed and brittle, smelling faintly of sulfur and dried cedar. Most of it was illegible, but the very last page contained crisp, handwritten instructions for something called the Rite of the False Horizon. We were 17, bored, and entirely convinced that the world held no real secrets left to uncover. We just had to sit in a circle, light a single black candle, and read the passage backwards, Mark whispered, his eyes gleaming with excitement under the flashlight's beam. Clara laughed, throwing a popcorn kernel at him, while I sat quietly on the edge of the mattress, feeling a strange, hollow chill settle in the room. We snuck out to the abandoned stone quarry at the edge of town just after midnight. The summer air was uncharacteristically cold, our breath pluming faintly in the dark. Mark placed the candle on a flat stone slab in the center of our circle. The flame flickered wildly, casting long, distorted shadows against the jagged rock walls. As Mark opened the ledger, the ambient sounds of the night, the crickets, the rustling leaves, the distant highway hum, suddenly died. The silence became heavy, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. Mark began to read, his voice sounding hollow and detached. The words didn't sound like any language we knew. They were harsh, guttural clicks and low vowels that seemed to vibrate directly inside my teeth. With the very last syllable, the candle flame snapped from a warm yellow to a brilliant, freezing violet. The silence didn't break when Mark finished reading. We sat perfectly still, waiting for a punchline, a scare, or a sign that something had happened. Nothing did. The violet flame burned steadily, casting a pale, unnatural glow across our faces. Clara let out a nervous chuckle, her voice sounding flat in the dead air. "Well, that was a bust. Let's go home." We stood up to pack our things, but as I reached for my jacket, I noticed our shadows against the quarry wall. There were 4 of them. There were only 3 of us. The 4th shadow was tall, impossibly thin, and stood directly between Clara's shadow and mine. It didn't mimic any of our movements. It remained perfectly stationary, its elongated arms hanging loosely at its sides. I froze, my throat tightening so fast I couldn't scream. I pointed a trembling finger at the wall. Mark and Clara followed my gaze, their expressions instantly hardening into masks of sheer terror. Before anyone could speak, the 4th shadow began to move. It didn't slide along the wall like light. It peeled itself off the stone surface, stepping into the 3-dimensional space of the quarry. The air temperature plummeted instantly, frost rapidly blooming across the flat rock slab and extinguishing the violet candle. In the absolute darkness that followed, a sound echoed from the center of our circle, the wet, distinct sound of someone taking a deep, ragged breath through water. We ran, abandoning our gear, the sound of heavy, uneven footsteps scraping the gravel right behind us all the way to the main road. We promised never to speak of that night again. We convinced ourselves it was a collective hallucination brought on by darkness and panic. But the ritual wasn't something you could simply walk away from. Within a week, the boundaries of our normal lives began to fray at the edges. It started with small things. I would wake up at exactly 3:33 a.m. every night, the air in my bedroom freezing cold and smelling faintly of sulfur. When I looked out my window, the streetlights would flicker in a rhythmic, mechanical pattern, as if typing out a message in a code I couldn't understand. Then, Clara called me in the middle of the afternoon, her voice hysterical. "It's in my house," she sobbed into the phone. I locked myself in the bathroom. Every door in my hallway is wide open, and I can hear someone walking up and down the stairs. But they aren't using feet. It sounds like someone dragging a heavy sack of wet leather. Through the line, beneath Clara's frantic breathing, I heard a sharp, splintering wood sound. The bathroom door on her end was being struck, slowly and deliberately, with tremendous force. Then, the call disconnected. I called Mark, frantically telling him to meet me at Clara's house. When we arrived, the front door was wide open. The house was completely empty, but every mirror in the building had been shattered from the inside out, the silver backing scratched away into jagged, meaningless symbols. Clara was gone. The police found no signs of forced entry or struggle at Clara's house. They dismissed her disappearance as a runaway case, but Mark and I knew the truth. The thing we had invited into the quarry was systematically removing us from reality. 2 days after Clara vanished, Mark showed up at my house. He looked unrecognizable. His eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by deep, dark circles, and his fingernails were bleeding, bitten down to the quick. He carried the old ledger tightly against his chest like a shield. "I figured it out," Mark whispered, his voice trembling as he dragged me into the kitchen, pulling the curtains shut. "The ledger, it isn't an invitation. It's a trade. The ritual opens a window, and whatever is on the other side needs vessels to cross over entirely. It took Clara first because she was the one who wanted to leave the quarry earliest." He opened the ledger to the final page. The crisp handwriting had changed. The original ink had faded, replaced by dark, rusty brown stains that formed new words in a jagged, frantic script. I looked closer and realized with a jolt of horror that the handwriting now perfectly matched Clara's unique cursive style. The text read, "The air is sweet inside the stone. Come down." Suddenly, the kitchen ceiling began to groan under an immense weight. The plaster cracked, and a dark, viscous liquid began to drip down onto the linoleum floor. It wasn't water, it was thick, black, and vibrated with a faint, low hum. "We have to reverse it," Mark screamed over a sudden, deafening static roar that filled the house. He threw the ledger onto the kitchen table and grabbed a box of matches from the counter. "If we burn the book, the window closes." He struck a match, but before the flame could touch the yellowed paper, the black liquid dripping from the ceiling coalesced into a solid mass behind him. It didn't have a face, but it possessed the unmistakable shape of the fourth shadow from the quarry. Long, thin tendrils of shadow shot forward, wrapping around Mark's wrists and lifting him entirely off the floor. "Run!" Mark choked out, his eyes bulging as the shadow began to pull him upward, directly into the ceiling drywall which seemed to liquefy like quicksand to receive him. I didn't run. I lunged for the matches, striking one frantically and throwing it onto the open ledger. The paper caught instantly, but instead of burning away into ash, the pages erupted into a blinding violet fire that didn't consume the wood of the table. The flames shot upward, wrapping around my arms like cold iron chains. The room spun violently. The walls of my kitchen vanished, replaced by the jagged, dark stone of the quarry under a starless, violet sky. I was standing in the center of the slab, the black candle burning brightly. Mark and Clara were there too, sitting in their original positions. But they weren't moving. Their skin was pale and stone-like, their eyes wide and completely hollow, staring directly into the center of the circle where I stood trapped. I tried to step out of the circle, but my legs refused to move. I looked down and saw that my feet were slowly sinking into the solid stone slab, the rock hardening around my ankles like setting concrete. The cold was absolute, seeping into my bones and slowing my heartbeat to a sluggish, heavy thud. The ledger lay open on the stone before me. The rusty handwriting had shifted once again. Below Clara's writing, new lines were forming in real time, the ink appearing as if scratched into the paper by an invisible blade. It was my own handwriting now, detailing the exact layout of my kitchen, my fears, and my final moments of panic. The violet flame began to die down, plunging the quarry back into natural darkness. The heavy silence returned, burying the world in a suffocating layer of stillness. I couldn't speak, I couldn't scream, and I couldn't close my eyes. I was entirely part of the structure now, a permanent anchor for the horizon we had foolishly opened. Weeks, months, or perhaps years passed in the dark. Time had no meaning in the stone. But tonight, the air suddenly stirred. From the distance, down the dirt path leading into the abandoned quarry, I heard the sound of faint laughter. Flashlights cut through the midnight fog, their beams dancing across the jagged rock walls. 3 teenagers stepped into the clearing, holding a flashlight and looking for a thrill. As they approached the flat stone slab where we sat waiting in the dark, I felt my shadow detach itself, stretching out toward them with an insatiable, ravenous hunger.